A lot of people have asked me what Marinda Steyn was like before she met Cecilia Steyn, and now all these years afterwards. Basically, was Marinda always capable of doing such things, or did she change somehow along the way? There is honestly a couple of answers to this question. When I first met Marinda, she seemed like a civilized person, a good-natured, caring person, someone who wanted to help, someone who cared. But at the same time, she was also an extremely proud woman. She was a very domineering person. In the beginning, when I met Miranda, she was exceptionally friendly. There was no warning bells, basically, to say that this person could be capable of any devastating things, that she was basically simply like the rest of Cecilia's group, who were there basically to help Cecilia, to care for her, to look after her, to help save her. But as the weeks and the months and the years progressed, I started to see different sides of Miranda. And even in speaking to other family members of Miranda's and other people who know Miranda, I started to hear very, very different stories about her. So, with having said that, I guess there are two faces to the side of the story, or two masks that Miranda constantly wore. In front of anyone, Miranda was very friendly. She was polite, caring, supportive. But as soon as the person left the room or left Cecilia's flat, she never hesitated even for a second to start basically backstabbing the person, saying such negative and horrible things about the person who had just left. And she did this for every member of Cecilia's group. And during, I suppose you could say, group gatherings with Cecilia's group, Miranda always loved to dominate the conversation. She loved to be the center of attention. She loved to override whenever anyone else was busy talking. It actually became extremely frustrating for everybody. And I know even for Ria herself, she became extremely frustrated. So frustrated to the point that she didn't even want to be around Miranda when Miranda was anywhere near Cecilia or near anywhere where Ria was. Miranda was just so uncomfortable to be around because of her domineering personality. She was a very controlling personality. But despite even Ria's own personal feelings towards Miranda, she still allowed Miranda, or should I rather say, kept Miranda within the help group, the group of Cecilia's friends, because there were so few people at that point in time, right in the beginning, who could actually, or were actually available at certain time frames to look after Cecilia, because Ria couldn't be there 24/7, so she had to rely on others. And like I said, there were too few of us in the beginning, so Miranda basically was included in this, even though even Ria herself couldn't stand Miranda. And I will also admit from my side, I couldn't stand Miranda either, for the exact same reasons. She was a very uncomfortable person to be around, just because of her domineering personality, and then the backstabbing statements that she would make. It was two-faced, constantly. I mean, it even went as far as to the point of Miranda being a school teacher. There was a time where it came to the end of a school year, and Miranda made an excuse to be at Cecilia's flat while I was there looking after Cecilia. And Cecilia, myself, and Miranda sat grading Miranda's students' end-of-year papers. And while we were going through the papers, Miranda constantly ridiculed her students, talking about how stupid they were, how pathetic they were, and the statements literally never ended. Marinda honestly did not care whether her students learned anything or not, and she verbalized this. She merely went to work, did her job, just to collect a paycheck at the end of the day, and go home. She didn't care about educating anybody. So whatever facade or fake persona that she put on in the classroom, it was just a mask, because she was backstabbing her own students as well. From the students' papers that I had personally read through, you could clearly see that Miranda had put no effort into even trying to teach these students. And sadly, Miranda even admitted that as well. She had absolutely no interest in trying to help her own students. But very soon into Miranda being introduced to Cecilia and becoming part of Cecilia's group, I noticed two very dominating scenarios or traits, characteristics, that just kept repeating over and over again. The first one was Miranda being exceptionally gullible. Now, overall, with everything that Cecilia had managed to fool her entire group and many, many, many other people of, at the end of it, yes, we were all exceptionally gullible. But for the majority of us, we required extensive evidence in order to believe a scenario. Like I had mentioned in previous recordings, Cecilia going to the extent of cutting herself, bruising her body, having blood spilling from her mouth, convulsating on the floor, having animals' blood poured onto her tiled floors. The evidence that the members in her group required was far more extensive. But with Miranda, absolutely anything Cecilia said, she believed straight away. There was never a question. And I honestly found this rather dumbfounding, because in the times that I had spent with Cecilia when Miranda wasn't around, Cecilia would openly and continuously mock Miranda about how gullible she is and how gullible she is out of everybody she had ever met her entire life. To the point that Cecilia told me that she's going to demonstrate to me, to show me just how gullible Miranda is, because I was honestly battling to believe that someone was just that easy to fool. There was one scenario where I had just bought a CD, and this band was not really well known. So Cecilia had persuaded me for her to keep the CD, telling me that she wanted to listen to the music. There was no other reason given to me for lending her the CD. Not that I ever had a problem lending a CD to her, but that was the reason I was given. Only to find out the following few days after that Cecilia had told Miranda that myself and Cecilia had actually recorded these songs on the CD, that we were the singers on the CD, and Miranda wholeheartedly believed it. And believe you me, these voices of the two women on the CD definitely do not sound anywhere near to my voice or Cecilia's voice. In that moment, I was still honestly dumbstruck and confused, and I didn't completely believe that Miranda believed this. But later that same day, Miranda came to Cecilia's house, and Cecilia brought up the whole scenario with the CD. Sadly, Miranda raved with such high praise about how wonderful the CD was, about how wonderful we can sing, and that it's such an awesome achievement. Needless to say, I believed Cecilia when she told me Miranda was just that gullible. There were many scenarios that Cecilia did that were honestly very insignificant, seemingly nothing, in order to display how gullible Miranda was. And sadly, I still don't think Miranda knows that these were all nonsense, because Cecilia liked to divide, or she aimed to divide each member from each member in the group. So no one would ever talk to the other. So no one more than likely ever told Miranda that Cecilia and I had never actually recorded the CD. But this turned Miranda into a joke to everybody in the group, and especially to Cecilia. Miranda was a joke for believing such nonsense. The other extreme trait or characteristic that stood out extremely dominantly with Miranda, and very, very, very soon into her meeting Cecilia, was how quickly and unnaturally and disturbingly obsessed Miranda became with Cecilia. She literally lived and breathed Cecilia. If something happened to Cecilia, it would be the end of Miranda, basically. Miranda's life revolved around Cecilia. For the others in Cecilia's group, we were all worried about Cecilia with her health and trying to keep her alive. We were there as support and as friends, but there was no obsession. With Miranda, there was a clear difference, like night and day. There was the obsession was extremely disturbing. You could see it in the way Miranda would look at Cecilia, the way she would talk to Cecilia, and even the number of times Miranda would message Cecilia throughout the entire day, whether she was teaching students at school or whether she was at home, and at any given second opportunity, she would pitch up at Cecilia's house, even when she was told not to. Miranda was actually told not to pitch up at Cecilia's house, and she still would, because she just could not stay away. She needed to be around Cecilia. It was honestly just that bad. And taking these two main or core traits of Miranda's into account, combining them, Miranda started leaving LaRue at Cecilia's flat, completely unattended, to be alone with Cecilia. At that stage, LaRue was between the ages of 10 and 12 years old. He was not capable of looking after Cecilia in any way. He was merely there as a visitor. He was merely there, maybe to be babysat. That was it. There was no other reason for LaRue to be there. He was not there to look after Cecilia at all. But with each time LaRue was left at Cecilia's house, Cecilia would make LaRue hopelessly and completely drunk. She would feed him alcohol after alcohol and force him with more alcohol to devastating points. Now, I hadn't seen the actual scenario of Cecilia doing this to LaRue, but Cecilia had told me that she did this each time he was there. And there were a few occasions where I would pitch up at Cecilia's house the following morning after LaRue had become drunk, where he had this unbelievable hangover. This boy was finished. He was still a kid, and all the puzzle pieces fit. The sad part is, Miranda knew about it. Miranda knew that Cecilia was basically force-feeding her child alcohol, purposely getting him drunk, and she would continuously bring LaRue to Cecilia's house, knowing that every time she did this, the same scenarios would repeat. And to be honest, I think there were many times that LaRue didn't even want to be at Cecilia's house. But Miranda somehow seemed to manage to just persuade LaRue or force LaRue into staying there. And this poor boy had no choice, especially at such a young age. With the way Miranda was with her children, and with what I know of her children, having met them, having seen them grow up for the years that I was friends with Cecilia, Miranda's children were exceptionally quiet. They were exceptionally reserved children. They were very obedient children. Literally, as soon as Marinda told them to do something, they would jump up and do it without hesitation. It was honestly weird, because most children, especially nowadays and of recent years, they still take their time in doing things. They procrastinate or they make excuses. But with Marinda's children, they jumped up straight away and they did whatever Marinda wanted, without question. I will go into another audio at another time, more specifically talking about Marinda's relationship, the devastating relationship that she had with her children. It's beyond words. It's beyond heartbreaking. But for now, I'm focusing on Marinda herself. I know with me personally, in the beginning, Marinda and I got along, but we were very soon divided from each other, just like the rest of the group. But somehow it was different to the rest of the group. And I think this basically mostly boiled down to Marinda's obsession. Since I was Cecilia's best friend, Marinda was envious. She was jealous, to the point that I would honestly say and genuinely say that she would be seething at her teeth every time she saw me or every time my name was mentioned. I learned very, very quickly that Marinda hated me. She hated me because I was Cecilia's best friend. I was pretty much the closest person to Cecilia. I was the person that Marinda wanted to be. Marinda wanted to be the closest person to Cecilia. She wanted to be the best friend. So the tension between Marinda and I became, well, quite tense. It was bad. It was really, really bad. I mean, whenever Marinda and I were on a very rare occasion in the same room, you couldn't even cut the atmosphere or the air with a chainsaw. It was so thick and it was so tense. For me, I was confused. I didn't know why she hated me. I could see it as clear as day. And Cecilia also told me that Marinda hates me, but she didn't tell me exactly why. But from Marinda's side, as far as I know, and looking back now after all these years and the trial, she wanted to be the best friend. She wanted to be the main person in Cecilia's life. Her obsession was indescribable. It was unnatural. It was exceptionally disturbing. I mean, Marinda never needed any evidence to believe anything Cecilia claimed. Marinda never needed to or wanted to question anything Cecilia said or did. She just accepted it. She just did it. It was like an obsessed fan. One of those fans that you basically have a restraining order against, if you could say. And as the months and the years progressed during my friendship with Cecilia, Marinda's jealousy and hatred towards me grew far more extensively. She pitched up at Cecilia's flat continuously, and even to the point where she would make excuses just to be alone with Cecilia, so she could have Cecilia all to herself, even if it wasn't me who was looking after Cecilia. There was one scenario that I'll never forget. I was at home when I was still living with my parents, and it was quite late at night. Cecilia sent me a text message in a panic state, saying that something bad is happening to her. No one's there to help her. She's about to lose her life, the normal type scenario. I asked her where Ria was, and she said to me Ria was busy teaching a class. So Cecilia was technically alone. So I proceeded to try phone Cecilia, just to keep checking on her to find out what was going on, because she made it out to be like it was a life and death scenario. that that night she was definitely going to be killed. But when I phoned Cecilia, Marinda answered. And what struck me as surprising was the blasting loud music in the background, the voices of other people in the background. I was very confused, and I asked Marinda if Cecilia is okay. Now, at this point, Cecilia hadn't told Marinda that she had sent me this message to say that she was in danger, basically. Because when I asked Marinda if Cecilia is okay, and I relayed the message that I had received, Marinda laughed at me, and she said to me, "No, Cecilia's at the pub." Marinda was at the pub with Cecilia. They were busy drinking, and Cecilia had a group of people around her. She was the highlight. She was the main attention. She was buying everyone drinks. Cecilia was getting drunk, and so the story carried on. I was completely shocked. But now by that time point, with knowing Miranda's hatred towards me, and having heard the nonsense, backstabbing statements that Miranda had said about me whenever I wasn't around, I figured that I shouldn't take Miranda's word for the truth. Because, after all, that's what I had experienced of Miranda up until that point, and I had yet to discover Cecilia's lies. So, after the phone call was ended, I waited a little while, and then I sent Cecilia a text message, basically extremely confused. I told her that I phoned. I told her Miranda answered, and I told her what Miranda said. To which Cecilia replied, laughing, saying that Miranda's talking absolute nonsense, that she's not at a bar, she's at home, they've been home all night, Miranda got there in a rush for the emergency. Still, Cecilia is in the battle of life and death, trying to stay stable, and also adding that I should know better than to believe any word that Miranda says, because Miranda is a liar. At that point, I was honestly confused, because up until then I had still believed everything Cecilia had said, everything I had witnessed. Up until that point, I had only known Miranda's hatred and statements about me. And I knew Miranda was pretty much famous by that point for talking nonsense about other people, and fabricating stories was second nature to her. But the thing that confused me the most, which basically made me believe Miranda more in the scenario, was the noise that I had heard in the background. It sounded like a bar. There was music. There was other people. It was as clear as day. There was honestly no question about it. But I never brought this topic up further with Cecilia. And this might have actually been one of the stepping stones where I initially started to question what Cecilia was telling me. If she really was in the balance of life and death. If she was also fooling me, just like she was fooling the rest. But ultimately, with regards to Miranda herself, the scenarios were not adding up, or they were just extremely confusing. I had personally witnessed Miranda fabricating the biggest nonsense about other people, including myself. But yet at the same time, she had told the truth that night, when Cecilia was trying to fool me, even though Miranda wasn't aware that Cecilia had sent me that message. But with regards to the events that would happen at the bar that was somewhat close by to where Cecilia stayed, that I will cover in another topic, because it's a very, very long topic and quite disturbing, and it also reveals another side of Cecilia's character very, very dominantly. I know along with the hatred that Miranda had towards me, I could also clearly sense the hatred that Miranda had towards Ria, because Ria was a mother figure to Cecilia. Cecilia would call her Mom. She was a mother. She took on the role and the responsibility of a mother looking after a child. Again, someone else was close to Cecilia, where Miranda desperately craved, clearly desperately craved, to be any bit close to Cecilia. There was also another scenario which, in all honesty, didn't even happen, but it was mentioned in High Court, and I've already mentioned it in one of my earliest recordings, where Marinda relates a scenario where she's discussing what happened with one of the school kids to me. And apparently I was petrified, scared, climbing off the walls to run away from Marinda. To where I apparently then go to Cecilia, who is in the kitchen, and tell Cecilia all of this. And then when Cecilia goes back to Miranda and Cecilia talk about what I had said. Like I said, the scenario had actually never even happened, but the nonsense stories were just multiplying, to be honest. So between truth and lies, they were getting all tangled up. They were meshed up. It was getting very confusing to tell on which side of anything Miranda stood, because her character itself, or the genuineness of who she was as a person, had very, very many question marks hanging over it, because there were too many contrasts between the things she did and the things she said, including with what she had done to her children, even during the time point I was friends with Cecilia. The things that she did to Marcel especially, it was horrific, but I've already mentioned that in another audio with regards to Marcel. By the time I had managed to leave Cecilia, aside from being exceptionally confused, paranoid, and scared with everything that had gone on, Miranda instantly took hold of the best friend status. She wanted to take my place immediately, and so quickly that she took the best friend status even before my leaving had actually been solidly confirmed. But I'm yet to still also talk about how I left. But there was a scenario where I was yet again, or several scenarios should I say, where I was yet again questioning who Marinda was as a person, even after leaving Cecilia Steyn. I knew several of Miranda's family members by that point, and with the one family member who was apparently trying to help me realize the truth behind Cecilia's lies, this person then phoned Miranda and put her on speaker. Without this person, or should I rather say without Miranda knowing that this person was on speaker, and without Miranda knowing that I was listening, this person then began to ask Miranda about Cecilia's health, about how things were going with Cecilia, if she was okay, if she was still in life and death scenarios, to where Miranda so light-heartedly replied and even laughed and talked about how well Cecilia is doing, how her health has dramatically improved, that she is completely safe and there haven't been any problems. For me, that was a confirmation to the lies Cecilia had been feeding me. But later on, and as time progressed, I also was told and began to learn that with Miranda, specifically from this family member of Miranda's, this person had known Miranda for a very, very, very long time. She knew Miranda exceptionally well. And she made one very bold statement. Basically, what you see with Marinda is not what you get. Marinda is exceptionally deceitful. Basically, Marinda is exceptionally good at covering up her deceitfulness to look like an innocent, caring, loving person. But she is actually horrific, and that she's done very devastating things to her children even before Marinda and her children had met Cecilia Steyn. Marinda had brought devastation into her children's lives and into other people's lives long before Cecilia Steyn was even on the scene. Marinda Steyn's integrity, her genuineness of being a kind-hearted, caring person, was completely gone. It was a facade, it was a mask. Yet through everything that I had experienced with Marinda firsthand, and everything that I had learned and heard along the years even afterwards, I honestly and genuinely still not could comprehend that Marinda would be capable of killing anybody. But that could be simply me projecting myself, because I honestly could not comprehend being able to harm anyone in any way, never mind actually kill somebody. So in general, I can't fathom that people will willfully go and hurt other people, and that people will willfully kill people as well. So I honestly battled very much so in believing that Marinda had actually murdered people, even though at the same time I didn't doubt it, simply because of Marinda's undying, obsessive loyalty towards Cecilia Steyn. I mean, I will even go as far as saying that I could come face to face with a known murderer who is currently in jail, who is a serial killer who I had never met before, and they even confess to having killed people in the most brutal of ways, and my mind still cannot comprehend that this person, even if they looked the part appearance-wise, even if they confessed it, my mind still can't comprehend the fact that someone could take someone else's life. So for Marinda, it was extremely confusing, but yet not at the same time, because from what I had experienced of her obsession and her undying loyalty, there was no doubt, even though I still battled to comprehend that she would kill for Cecilia Steyn, even though she confessed to killing, confessed to enjoying killing. I still battled to fathom, to comprehend that this person that I had met could do something like this. But again, I am more than likely projecting myself, because I could never do something like that. But that's the truth. That's what Marinda did. Her undying loyalty and her obsession. I don't know if Marinda had ever killed anybody in her past, but from investigations and from the trial, it doesn't seem like it took much for Cecilia to convince Marinda to murder anybody. It seemed like Cecilia just had to say, "Go kill," and Marinda would jump and do it. With LaRue and Marcel, it was a completely different story. They had threats, death threats hanging over their heads if they didn't do it. But with Marinda, she willfully wanted to do it for Cecilia. And I honestly do not know to what extent Marinda knows the truth behind a lot of the things that Cecilia did, or if she still believes all the lies. I do know she believes a vast amount of lies, but a part of me still thinks, surely by this time point, especially with being told to kill someone, there must be some part of you that must say, hold on, there's something wrong here. Let me reevaluate the scenario and reevaluate who you are as a person. Because even the reasons for killing people, they don't make sense at all. Not that there ever could be a reason to kill someone. but the simplest of things, killing someone just for money. And Marinda so easily did it. And what's worse is, or added, should I say, she was even part of the plans. She helped plan the murders, and even as I'm recording all of this, I'm shaking my head from side to side because it's completely dumbfounding to me. And I think I just battle honestly between the mask that people can wear so brilliantly, yet be the extreme opposite. With Cecilia, she had this very extensive, fabricated storyline to her life in order to manipulate people, to do stuff. And yes, others in Cecilia's group were loyal to her. I was also loyal to her, but only to certain degrees. Because when it came to morality, when it came to certain things, Cecilia knew that with a number of us, we couldn't be pushed further than that. And that's when she would also begin outing people, basically killing people. For myself, Cecilia had tried many times to push my boundaries, but my boundaries were exceptionally rigid. So that would be why I would be, or was rather, isolated more and more from even seeing Cecilia as often as I usually would. But with Miranda had no fabricated story. No story of coming from an occult bloodline or trying to save her life, or her life being in the balance of death and life, or anything of that crazy sort. Miranda did this. She did this all purely out of her obsession, her unnatural obsession with Cecilia, her disturbing obsession, her disturbing loyalty, her undying loyalty, to the point where she, even after she was sentenced for a number of lifetimes, she was the one that offered to testify again, to try and get Cecilia to be let off free. She was the one that wanted to take it all, to be sentenced for everything, to sacrifice her life, basically, just to set Cecilia free, even though she knew Cecilia was guilty. She would basically do anything for Cecilia, even though in one of my other recordings titled Your Life a Means to an End, Cecilia even basically had a death sentence hanging over Miranda's head without her knowing it. Cecilia was in Miranda's will, so at any given moment, if Cecilia needed to, she would have killed Miranda. But I highly doubt Miranda even suspected that. I mean, to be fair, I think if she did, there would have been a fight, or she would have broken free. Something of that sort would have happened. But Miranda was just that gullible, that fooled, that wholeheartedly, unnaturally obsessed. Even to the points where she would sacrifice her own children. Even to the points where she did other things to other of her own family members. All for nonsense reasons. All just because Cecilia wanted it. Nothing was off bounds when it came to Cecilia. Miranda would do anything. That's just how bad her obsession was. And when I found out that Cecilia and Miranda became lovers, well, to be honest, as much as it shocked me, it also did not shock me. Because I had already seen Miranda's obsession. So it just added up. And even backtracking now to the years where I was still friends with Cecilia, Miranda lived a fair distance away from Cecilia. But I watched her move closer and closer till ultimately She lived above Cecilia's flat. She just could not be far away physically from Cecilia. I can't fathom that kind of obsession. I don't think most people can. But that is what it is. And sadly, this is what it resulted in. So whether Marinda was actually capable of murdering and any of the other crimes beforehand, I honestly don't know. She was a despicable person. She was a deceitful person. She was many things, none of them good, before she met Cecilia. So, in all honesty, I think that the obsession just slightly tipped the scale into Miranda doing all of these things, into her murdering and committing other crimes. So the capabilities were already there. I guess she just needed a reason or a person to push her just that one step further in actually committing these crimes. Because it sounds like, and it might have just been part of Miranda's character even since the beginning.